The seriously injured dog brought her puppy to the old lady's house, and a heartbreaking reason made everyone cry. Sarah Miller had lived alone in her Vermont farmhouse for the past 12 years, since her husband Robert passed away. At 72, she filled her days tending to her small vegetable garden, feeding local birds, and occasionally helping her neighbors with their pets, a holdover from her 40 years as a veterinary technician. That October morning started like any other. Sarah was on her front porch, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise paint the green mountains in brilliant autumn colors. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of fallen leaves and approaching winter. Another quiet day, she murmured to herself, not knowing how wrong she was. The first unusual sign came around noon. Her wind chimes tinkled despite the still air, and her bird feeder stood eerily empty. Even the chatty blue jays that usually dominated her yard were nowhere to be seen. Sarah felt something different in the air, a tension she couldn't explain. As dusk approached, she heard it, a soft whimper from her back porch. Years of working with animals had trained her ears to recognize sounds of distress. Sarah grabbed her flashlight and opened her back door carefully. There, huddled against a wood pile, was a large German Shepherd mix. The dog's fur was matted with mud and blood, and she was clearly favoring her right side. But what made Sarah's breath catch was a tiny bundle carefully placed between the dog's front paws, a small puppy, no more than a few weeks old. "Oh, sweet girl," Sarah whispered, her heart breaking at the sight. The mother dog's eyes met hers, not with fear or aggression, but with an almost human-like desperation. She nudged the puppy forward slightly, then laid her head down, exhausted. Sarah recognized the mother dog. She'd seen her occasionally over the past few months, always at a distance, roaming the outskirts of nearby properties. Local rumors suggested she'd escaped from an abusive situation several towns over, but no one knew for certain. "You came to the right place," Sarah said softly, already moving with the efficiency of her years of experience. She called Dr. Thompson, the local vet who had been her colleague and friend for decades. "Emily, I need you, and bring your emergency kit." While waiting, Sarah sat on her porch steps, close enough to watch but not so near as to frighten them. The mother dog's eyes never left her, but there was no growling, no signs of aggression, just that same desperate trust. "You knew, didn't you?" Sarah spoke quietly. "You knew I used to help animals." The dog's tail thumped once weakly against the wooden porch. Looking at the pair, Sarah felt tears well up in her eyes. This mother, injured and afraid, had somehow found her way here, not to save herself, but to ensure her puppy's survival. It was a kind of trust that transcended species, a mother's final act of protection. The sound of tires on gravel announced Dr. Thompson's arrival as headlights swept across the porch. Sarah saw the full extent of the mother dog's injuries in the harsh light. Her side was torn open, likely from a confrontation with another animal or a run-in with barbed wire. The fact that she'd managed to carry her puppy to safety in this condition was nothing short of miraculous. "What do we have?" Dr. Thompson asked, medical bag in hand. Sarah looked at the mother dog, who was now licking her puppy with what little strength she had left. "We have a miracle," she answered, "and we're not going to waste it." The next few hours became a blur of focused activity. Dr. Thompson's initial examination confirmed Sarah's worst fears. The mother dog's injuries were severe. Deep lacerations ran along her right flank, and there were signs of infection setting in. The dog's temperature was dangerously high, and she was severely dehydrated. "She's been carrying these injuries for at least 2 days," Emily Thompson muttered, gently cleaning the wounds. They had carefully moved the mother and pup into Sarah's mudroom, converting it into a makeshift treatment area. It's a miracle she's still alive. The puppy, meanwhile, seemed healthy despite everything. "She's been keeping her baby fed even in this condition," Sarah observed, cradling the tiny creature, sacrificing her own strength to keep the little one alive. They worked methodically through the night. Sarah's years of experience came flooding back as she assisted Emily, holding supplies, monitoring vital signs, and keeping the mother dog calm with gentle words and touches. The dog remained remarkably cooperative, as if she understood they were trying to help. "Look at this," Emily said, pointing to an area of matted fur around the dog's neck. Beneath it, they found an old collar grown into the skin. This confirmed the abuse rumors. Someone had her chained up and abandoned her, probably when they realized she was pregnant. Sarah felt a familiar anger rise in her chest, the same anger that had driven her to report animal abuse cases throughout her career. Well, she's not going back to that. Not ever. Around midnight, Emily had done all she could. The next 24 hours are critical, she explained, packing up her supplies. I've given her antibiotics and fluids, but she's very weak. The fact that she's made it this far shows incredible strength, but I know... Sarah nodded, understanding the unspoken warning. She'd seen enough cases like this to know the odds. I'll stay. Stay with them. After Emily left, Sarah settled into an old armchair. She dragged into the mudroom. The mother dog lay on a thick blanket, her puppy nursing contentedly despite the trauma of the day. Sarah had managed to get some water and a little food into the mother, but she was more concerned with making sure her baby ate than taking care of herself. You need a name, Sarah told her, keeping her voice low and soothing. Something strong. She studied the dog's face, her gentle brown eyes, the way she watched over her puppy even in her weakened state. Grace. That's what I'll call you, she thought, because despite everything humans did to you, you still found the grace to trust one more time. Throughout the night, Sarah dozed fitfully, waking every hour to check on Grace's temperature and breathing. The puppy, whom she started calling Hope, stayed curled against her mother, occasionally making tiny squeaking sounds in her sleep. Around dawn, Grace's breathing became labored. Sarah's heart clenched. She'd seen this too many times before. She called Emily immediately. "Hold on, sweet girl," she whispered, stroking Grace's head while they waited. "You've come so far. Your baby needs you. I need you." Grace's eyes glazed with fever, fixed on Sarah's face. Her tail thumped weakly against a blanket once, twice. Then she did something that brought tears to Sarah's eyes. She nudged her puppy closer to Sarah, just as she had done on the porch. "No," Sarah said firmly, understanding the gesture. "This isn't goodbye. You're not just saving her anymore. You're saving both of us. My house has been too quiet for too long. We need you." She didn't know if it was her words, the antibiotics finally taking effect, or simply Grace's extraordinary will to live, but the dog's breathing gradually steadied. By the time Emily arrived 20 minutes later, Grace's fever had broken. "Well," Emily said after examining her patient, "it seems we have a fighter on our hands." Sarah watched as Grace gently nuzzled her puppy, then laid her head trustingly on Sarah's lap. "No," she corrected. "We have a family." The following weeks brought a steady rhythm of healing to Sarah's farmhouse. Grace's physical recovery was slow, but consistent. Her wounds gradually closed under Emily's careful treatment and Sarah's constant care. The infected areas began to heal, and her matted fur started growing back properly. After a gentle grooming session, Hope, the puppy, thrived under the dual attention of her mother and Sarah. At 6 weeks old, she was a bundle of energy, exploring every corner of the mudroom with wobbling steps, while Grace watched attentively. Sarah had forgotten how puppy antics could fill a house with laughter. "You know," Emily said during one of her checkups, "I haven't heard you laugh like that since Robert passed." Sarah paused in her play with Hope, who was attacking her shoelaces. "I suppose I haven't had much reason to," she admitted. "But these two, they remind me of why I loved working with animals in the first place." Word about Grace and Hope spread through their small Vermont community. Sarah's neighbors, many of whom had kept their distance since Robert's death, started dropping by. They brought donations, dog food, blankets, toys, but more importantly, they brought conversation and company. Martha, from the general store, shared stories about seeing Grace in the woods months ago. She never let anyone near her, she recalled. But she never showed aggression either, just watched from a distance, like she was trying to figure out who she could trust. Tom, whose farm bordered Sarah's property, helped build a secure fence around part of the backyard for when they were ready to go outside. He explained, though Sarah suspected he also enjoyed having a reason to visit and chat. As Grace grew stronger, her personality emerged. She was gentle but protective, especially of Hope. She developed a habit of resting her head on Sarah's knee while they sat together in the evenings, as if reassuring herself that her trust had been well placed. One morning, about 3 weeks after Grace's arrival, Sarah opened the mudroom door to find Grace standing, tail wagging. Tentatively, Sarah asked, "Want to see the rest of your home?" Grace's response was to pick up Hope carefully by the scruff and follow Sarah into the kitchen. That day marked a turning point. Grace began exploring the house, always keeping Hope close. She claimed a spot by the living room window, where she could watch the birds that had finally returned to Sarah's feeders. Hope, growing more adventurous by the day, discovered the joy of chasing fallen leaves through the kitchen. "Robert would have loved this," Sarah told Grace one evening as they sat on the porch, Hope asleep between them. "He always said a house needs the sound of paws to be a proper home." Grace looked up at her with those understanding brown eyes and shifted closer, pressing against Sarah's leg. The gesture brought unexpected tears to Sarah's eyes, not of sadness this time, but of gratitude. Sarah's journal, and used since Robert's passing, found new purpose. Day 23 with Grace and Hope. Grace walked the entire length of the backyard today. No limping. Hope discovered a reflection in the oven door and spent an hour barking at herself. Martha brought homemade dog treats and stayed for coffee. Tom's coming tomorrow to help install a dog door. The house feels alive again. Sometimes, the best healing happens when you're busy helping others heal. That night, as Sarah prepared for bed, she heard a new sound. The soft click of dog nails on hardwood as Grace climbed the stairs for the first time, Hope following close behind. They settled into the room Sarah had prepared for them, but Grace kept watching the doorway, understanding the invitation. Sarah brought her pillows and blanket into the room. "Just for tonight," she told them, making a bed on the floor. But as she drifted off to sleep, with Grace's head near her hand and Hope's puppy snores filling the air, she knew that just for tonight was another change her heart needed to make. As autumn deepened into winter, the story of Grace and Hope began touching lives beyond Sarah's farmhouse. It started small, with Emily sharing their progress during vet visits with other clients. Soon, local families began asking if they could visit, especially those with children who needed to learn about kindness to animals. Sarah found herself hosting small groups on Saturday afternoons. Grace, now fully recovered physically, proved to be a natural therapy dog. She seemed to know exactly how to approach fearful children, lay her head gently in their laps until their tension melted away. Hope, growing into a playful 3-month-old puppy, brought laughter with her clumsy enthusiasm. "She's got her mother's heart," Martha observed one day, watching Grace comfort a shy 7-year-old named Amy. The girl had been attacked by a dog the previous year and hadn't gone near one since. Yet here she was, carefully stroking Grace's ears while Hope napped nearby. Amy's mother approached Sarah later, tears in her eyes. "This is the first time she's touched a dog since the incident. We've tried everything, counseling, therapy, dogs at the hospital, but something about Grace. Grace knows what it means to be afraid," Sarah explained, "and she knows what it means to learn to trust again." The visits led to something unexpected, a partnership with the local elementary school. The guidance counselor, Mrs. Chun, proposed bringing children who were struggling with various issues to meet Grace and Hope. Sarah's farmhouse became a safe haven where kids could talk about their problems while sitting with Grace or playing fetch with Hope. One cold December morning, Tom arrived with his teenage grandson, Jake, who had been getting into trouble at school. Thought maybe he could help with the dogs, Tom suggested. Better than sitting around playing video games. Jake, initially sullen, transformed when Hope bounded up to him with her favorite rope toy. Soon, he was helping Sarah develop a small agility course in the backyard, using materials from Tom's barn. The project gave him a purpose, something to look forward to after school. "You know what I like about dogs," Jake said one afternoon, watching Hope master a new trick he taught her. "They don't care about your past. They just care about who you are right now." Sarah glanced at Grace, who was watching her puppy's progress with obvious pride. That's true. They're excellent judges of character. Though Grace wouldn't let just anyone train her puppy. The boys' shoulders straightened slightly at that as winter settled in. Sarah's house became known as the Grace Place. Children would stop by after school to read to the dogs, do their homework, or just talk. Parents noticed positive changes in their kids: better grades, improved behavior, and increased empathy. Emily joked during one of her now social visits, "You've gone from retired vet tech to running an unofficial animal-assisted therapy program." Sarah watched Grace gently guide Hope through a new agility obstacle, while Jake offered encouragement. "Sometimes life has other plans for us," she replied. "Sometimes it sends us exactly what we need, even if it comes in unexpected packages." The transformation wasn't just in the visitors. Sarah's house, once a quiet monument to loss, now hummed with life. The walls that had held only memories now displayed children's artwork, drawings of Grace and Hope, thank you cards, and photos of successful graduates of what the kids called Grace Training. One evening, as snow fell softly outside, Sarah found herself reviewing the journal entries from the past months. Day 97, 7 with Grace and Hope. Jake taught Hope to weave through poles today. His grandmother says he's bringing his grades up. Amy brought her little sister to meet Grace. No fear in either of them now. Mrs. Chun wants to discuss making the program official next spring. Grace helped 3 new children today. She seems to know exactly who needs her most. Hope's getting so big, but she still curls up with her mother every night. Robert would say we're building something special here, she thought. He'd be right. Grace patted over and placed her head in Sarah's lap, her way of saying it was time for their evening walk. Hope pranced by the door, leash in mouth, while snow continued to drift past the windows. "Just like your mother," Sarah told Hope fondly. "You know exactly what we need, don't you?" As they stepped out into the quiet winter evening, Sarah reflected on how much had changed since that desperate night on her back porch. Grace had come seeking sanctuary for her puppy, but she'd given so much more than she'd received. She'd helped create a place where healing wasn't just possible. It was contagious. The January storm hit Vermont with unexpected ferocity. Weather reports warned of the worst blizzard in decades, and Sarah spent the morning preparing, filling water jugs, checking the generator, and bringing extra firewood inside. Grace seemed unsettled, pacing between windows and whining softly. "Something wrong, girl?" Sarah asked, watching Grace's unusual behavior. Even Hope, normally playful, stayed close to her mother. The answer came that afternoon when Emily called. "Sarah, we got trouble. The Hendersons' barn roof partially collapsed from the snow. They got 5 dogs in there, and the roads are becoming impassable. The Hendersons live 3 miles away, elderly farmers who take in retired working dogs. Tom's trying to reach them with his truck, but it's not looking good." Grace was already at the door, her posture alert. Something in Sarah's expression or tone must have communicated the emergency. "I'll call you back," Sarah said, her mind racing. The old cross-country skis in her garage, and used since Robert's passing, might be her only option. Making her decision, Sarah layered up in winter gear. "Grace, Hope, stay," she commanded firmly. But when she opened the door, Grace slipped past her with surprising speed. Hope tried to follow, but Grace turned and gave a sharp bark, sending her puppy back inside. "You want to help, don't you?" Sarah asked, looking at Grace's determined expression. "I remember how you survived in these woods for months." "Okay, girl, let's do this together." The journey was grueling. Wind-driven snow reduced visibility to mere feet, and the cold bit through Sarah's layers. But Grace proved invaluable, finding the safest path through drifts and keeping them on course. When Sarah became disoriented, Grace led the way. They found the Hendersons' barn partially caved in on one side. The dogs inside were barking frantically through the swirling snow. Sarah saw Mr. Henderson trying to clear debris, his wife attempting to calm the frightened animals. "Sarah," Mrs. Henderson called out in disbelief. "How did you—" Grace led the way. Sarah shouted over the wind. "Where do you need us?" Working together, they managed to create an opening. Grace showed remarkable intelligence, helping calm the other dogs as they were let out one by one. Her presence seemed to reassure them, making the evacuation smoother. Just as they were guiding the last dog out, Sarah heard an ominous cracking sound. Grace barked sharply, lunging forward to push Mrs. Henderson away from a falling beam. The action saved Mrs. Henderson, but left Grace trapped beneath some fallen boards. Sarah's heart stopped. "No, no," she whispered, scrambling to reach her friend. The memory of that first night, when Grace was injured and desperate, flashed through her mind. Mr. Henderson helped her lift the debris while his wife kept the other dogs contained. Grace lay still for a moment, then slowly stood, shaking off snow. She was limping but alive. "My girl," Sarah breathed, wrapping her arms around Grace's neck. "My brave, beautiful girl." The sound of an approaching vehicle cut through the storm. Tom's truck had finally made it through. With his help, they loaded all the dogs and the Hendersons into the vehicle. "What about you?" Tom asked Sarah. She looked at Grace, who was already turning toward home. "We'll make it back the way we came." Grace knows the way. The return journey was slower, with Sarah supporting Grace whenever her limp worsened. The storm was beginning to ease, and through breaks and clouds, the setting sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. When they finally reached Sarah's farmhouse, Hope was waiting anxiously by the door. The puppy fussed over her mother, licking snow from her fur, while Sarah checked Grace for injuries. Miraculously, there was just some bruising, no serious harm done. That evening, as the storm held outside, Sarah's phone rang continuously with calls from neighbors checking on them and sharing updates about the Hendersons and their dogs. The local news even picked up the story. Retired vet tech and rescue dog brave Blizzard to save animals. Sarah sat on the floor between Grace and Hope, overwhelmed by the day's events. "You know what the amazing thing is," she told them. "A few months ago, you came to me for help. Today, you help save others. That's how healing works. It spreads, grows, multiplies." Grace rested her head on Sarah's lap, while Hope curled up against her mother's side. Outside, the storm continued, but inside was warmth, love, and the quiet certainty that sometimes the greatest acts of courage come from those who have known the deepest fear. Spring arrived early that year, bringing with it changes that no one in the small Vermont community could have predicted. 6 months ago, Sarah's farmhouse, once a quiet reminder of loss, had become the heart of something remarkable. The local school board officially approved the Grace Project, a program using grace and hope to help children with emotional and behavioral challenges. What had started as informal visits had grown into structured sessions, with Emily providing professional guidance and Sarah sharing her years of animal care experience. "Look at this," Emily said one morning, showing Sarah a letter from the State Veterinary Association. They wanted to feature the Grace Project in their quarterly journal as a model for other communities. Sarah watched through the window as Grace supervised a group of children in the backyard. Jake, now their regular volunteer, was teaching them how to use positive reinforcement in dog training. Hope, nearly full-grown but still puppyish at heart, demonstrated tricks with enthusiastic tail wags. Grace did more than save herself and Hope, Sarah reflected. She started a chain reaction of healing. The evidence was everywhere. Amy, the once fearful girl, was now helping younger children overcome their own fear of dogs. The Hendersons had rebuilt their barn with community support, making it better than before. Their rescue dogs now participated in the Grace Project too, giving more children a chance to connect with animals. One warm April afternoon, Sarah received an unexpected visitor, a woman she didn't recognize, clutching a newspaper clipping about the Grace Project. "My name is Karen," she said nervously. "I think Grace used to be my dog." Sarah felt Grace press against her leg. Calm but alert, the dog showed no sign of fear or recognition. Karen's story came out in broken sentences. She'd fallen on hard times, lost her home, and left Grace with someone who'd promised to care for her. Later, she learned the person had abandoned Grace, but by then, she couldn't find her. "I've gotten back on my feet," Karen explained, tears in her eyes. "When I saw the article, I just wanted to know she was okay. I've carried so much guilt." Sarah looked at Grace, who moved forward to gently nose Karen's hand, offering forgiveness more profound than words could express. "Would you like to be part of the Grace Project?" Sarah asked. "We could always use more volunteers, and I think Grace will like that." Karen's grateful smile said everything. As spring bloomed into summer, Sarah's journal reflected the fullness of her life. Day 248 with Grace and Hope. Karen helped us welcome 2 new therapy dogs to the program today. Jake's been accepted to veterinary school. Says Grace inspired his career choice. Hope completed her therapy dog certification. Like mother, like daughter, the new addition to the house is almost finished. We'll be able to help more children soon. Grace showed a new child how to trust today. Still amazes me how she knows exactly what each person needs, Sarah wrote. Robert would say we've come full circle, from one desperate night to a whole community of healing. One evening, as fireflies began to dance in the twilight, Sarah sat on her porch steps, the same steps where Grace had first appeared with Hope. Grace lay beside her, gray now showing around her muzzle, but her eyes still bright with wisdom and love. Hope sprawled nearby, taking a break from her therapy dog duties. The sound of children's laughter drifted from the backyard, where a small group was helping Jake set up for tomorrow's sessions. Martha's car pulled up, bringing fresh-baked treats for their weekend program. Tom waved from his tractor in the adjacent field, where he was helping prepare space for their planned animal sanctuary. "You know what, Grace?" Sarah said softly, scratching behind her ear. "That night you brought Hope to my porch, I thought I was saving you, but really, you were saving all of us." Grace's tail thumped against the wooden steps once, twice, just as it had that first night. But now, it wasn't a gesture of desperate hope. It was an affirmation of everything they'd built together, a place where broken spirits could heal, where trust could be rebuilt, and where love multiplied with each new day. In the growing dusk, Sarah looked out over her transformed world, the busy yard, the expanding programs, the lives touched and changed. She thought about how a single act of trust, born of mother's desperate love, had rippled outward to heal an entire community. Grace rested her head on Sarah's lap, and Hope came to lean against her other side. Together, they watched the fireflies rise into the darkening sky. Each tiny light a reminder that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in fur and trust and second chances.